The rain had already stopped by the time I reached the corner of Weston Street, but the sky still held the heavy gray weight of it. My shoes tapped softly on the wet pavement, the echo following me like a shadow. In my hand, I clutched a folded letter, the one that had summoned me here. The letter wasn't emotional, not even close. Just a standard, typed notice from Harris and Doyle, attorneys at law, informing me of the reading of my father's will. It could have been a tax notice for all the warmth it had. Still, my stomach had been twisting since it arrived last week. I paused at the entrance, staring up at the sandstone facade of the building. It was taller than I remembered, its windows framed with dark ironwork, as though the place had been designed to keep secrets locked inside. The brass handle on the heavy oak door was cold under my palm. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and old paper. A receptionist with perfect hair and a voice like still water directed me to the third floor. When the elevator doors opened, the first thing I saw was my brother, Daniel, was leaning against the wall outside the conference room, one hand in the pocket of his tailored navy suit. His tie, silk burgundy, was loose, in that calculated way that said, "I'm relaxed because I'm winning." He spotted me immediately. His smirk appeared before the words, "Well, look who decided to show up." I didn't answer. My coat was damp, and the room's warmth felt like it was pressing me toward him, like it wanted to force me into his orbit. I stepped around him instead. Through the open door, I saw the others. Aunt Margaret, perched stiffly at the edge of her chair, eyes darting between her phone and the door. Uncle Robert, already fiddling with the cufflinks he probably hadn't worn since the last funeral. Two cousins I barely recognized, and at the head of the long mahogany table sat Mr. Harris, the family lawyer for as long as I could remember. His hair was thinner, his glasses thicker, but his calm presence was exactly the same. Double quotes, "Ah, you're here," he said, standing. "Please, take a seat. We'll begin shortly." I slid into the only empty chair 2 seats away from Daniel, though close enough to feel the smugness radiating off him. He was in his element. One leg crossed over the other, wristwatch catching the overhead light, eyes half-lidded like a cat that had already eaten. He didn't have to say it. Everyone knew what he thought was about to happen. Daniel had been Dad's golden boy, the one who took over the family business, the one who stayed close, the one who, at least on the surface, did everything right. I, on the other hand, had taken a different path. I watched the slow sweep of the second hand on the wall clock. My pulse seemed to match it. Mr. Harris cleared his throat, and the low hum of conversation faded. "If we're all settled," he began, "we can proceed with the reading of Mr. Charles Everett's last will and testament." The words landed heavy. Last, the finality of it pressed against my chest. I folded my hands in my lap, the cool metal of the chair's armrest grounding me. This was it. Daniel leaned back, smiling faintly. The kind of smile that said he already knew the ending. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses, the thin metal frames catching the pale light from the overhead fixtures. The room had that strange stillness that only happens in situations like this where everyone is breathing, but it feels like no one dares to. He unfolded the document with deliberate care, smoothing it against the polished table. His voice was steady, measured, each word precise. "I, Charles Everett, being of sound mind and body." My father's name hit me like a soft punch. The sound of it in that formal tone made him feel far away. Not the man in old sweaters who grilled steaks on summer evenings. Not the man whose laugh could fill a room. No, in that moment, he was the estate, a subject of paperwork, something to be handled. "Hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The lawyer began with the formalities, revoking previous wills, naming Mr. Harris as the executor, confirming dates. My eyes wandered for a moment. Daniel was leaning back even further now, fingers drumming lightly on the table. His expression didn't waver. He was sure. Mr. Harris moved on to the first bequests. "To my sister, Margaret Everett, I leave my late wife's pearl necklace and accompanying earrings, as well as the sum of $5,000. Aunt Margaret's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but her lips remained pressed tight. She gave a small nod. "To my brother, Robert Everett, I leave my first edition copy of The Old Man and the Sea, along with the fishing rods stored in the boathouse." Uncle Robert chuckled under his breath, muttering something about finally getting them back. It went on like that for several minutes. Small items, sentimental pieces, modest sums. Each time, the recipient gave some polite acknowledgement, their voice just loud enough to be heard over the quiet scribble of the paralegal taking notes. When Mr. Harris read my name, my shoulders tensed. "To my daughter, Claire Everett." I felt Daniel's eyes flick toward me. "I leave my mother's journal, currently kept in the study desk, as well as the cedar rocking chair from the front porch. The journal, I remembered its worn leather cover, the faint scent of lavender that lingered even decades later. My grandmother's handwriting, small and deliberate, filled those pages. The rocking chair. I had sat in it as a child, my father's arm draped around me while he told stories about his own childhood. It wasn't money, it wasn't property, but it was something real. Daniel smirked again, the second time since I arrived. This one was smaller, sharper. He thought the distribution so far confirmed what he expected. All the major assets, the house, the business, the accounts, would go to him. Mr. Harris continued, to my son, Daniel Everett. Daniel straightened, the performance of patience ending. His shoulders squared, and a subtle, almost imperceptible lift of his chin told the entire room he was ready for his moment. I leave my cufflink collection, my gold pocket watch, and the sum of— There was a pause just long enough for Daniel's smile to deepen. $20,000. A ripple moved through the room. It wasn't quite surprise, not yet, but it was the first crack in the atmosphere. Daniel's brow furrowed for less than a heartbeat before smoothing over. He leaned back again, hiding any hint of concern. Because the big reveal was still coming. It had to be. The lawyer paused to take a sip of water, his hand steady as ever. The sound of the glass touching the table was the only break in the silence. Daniel used that moment like it was a stage cue. He glanced around the table, slow and deliberate, as if making sure we all noticed him, the chosen one. His gaze, finally, landed on me, and that smirk spread across his face like a private joke. He wasn't planning to explain that. It wasn't a broad smile, no teeth, just that curve at the corner of his mouth. The one that said, "You're about to see me win." I didn't look away. Memories flickered, Christmas dinners where Dad bragged about Daniel's natural leadership, while my achievements were met with polite nods. Board meetings where Daniel spoke over me, knowing Dad wouldn't stop him. That smirk had been there through all of it. Mr. Harris resumed reading. The remainder of my estate, after the above bequests and the settlement of all debts, shall be distributed according to the clauses that follow. This was it. The air in the room shifted heavier. Expectant, chairs creaked softly as people leaned forward. Aunt Margaret pressed her lips together so tightly they almost disappeared. Daniel's smirk became a full smile now, one corner of his mouth higher than the other. His fingers drummed again on the table, but slower this time, confident beats. I caught the faintest movement from Mr. Harris. It wasn't hesitation exactly, but something passed over his expression, like the awareness that what came next would matter. Daniel noticed nothing. He was too busy basking in the attention he thought he deserved. He even spoke low, but loud enough for me to hear. Try not to look too disappointed. I didn't answer. My hands were still folded. In my lap, the journal and rocking chair already sitting in the back of my mind like safe harbors. The lawyer's voice carried on, calm and precise. To the individual I believe will honor my legacy, care for what I have built, and remember not only the work, but the values that guided it. Daniel's smile widened. His shoulders relaxed, as if the victory had already been declared. Mr. Harris's eyes swept the room, landing briefly, deliberately on me. That tiny glance didn't go unnoticed. Daniel didn't see it, because in his mind, there was only one possible ending to this story. The cadence of Mr. Harris's voice began to fade in my ears. The weight of the room dissolved, replaced by something warmer, the quiet hum of cicadas in late summer, the scent of cedar and rain on old wood. I was back on the front porch of our house, the rocking chair beneath me creaking in slow rhythm. My father sat beside me, his arm draped over the backrest, his voice low and thoughtful. You can't measure a person by the size of their bank account, Claire. You measure them by what they leave behind in people. I must have been 15, maybe 16. It was the summer after my mother's illness had taken most of his energy, but none of his gentleness. The business was already struggling, but he never let me see the fear in his eyes. Not then. I remembered watching the way he would scan the yard as he spoke, like the grass and the oak trees were part of the conversation. Daniel's got Dr. Dove, he'd said that night. That's good. But drive without reflection is like wind without a sail. It was rare for him to talk about Daniel in a way that wasn't pure praise. I remember the flicker of hesitation in his tone, the smallest seed of worry. Another memory surfaced, sharper. Years later, I was in his study sorting through papers while he dictated notes for a speech he had to give at a charity event. He paused, watching me. You notice details, Claire? Not everyone does. That's why I trust you with the things that matter. At the time, I thought he meant errands, tasks, the small stuff. But there had been something else in his eyes that day. Something I didn't fully understand. The snap of paper being folded pulled me back to the present. Mr. Harris had just finished one section of the will. The sound of chairs shifting and people clearing their throats brought the reality rushing back. Daniel was still leaning back, confidence radiating from him like heat off asphalt. He glanced at his watch, impatient for the formality to be over and the victory to be declared. I looked at him, then at Mr. Harris, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw that same look my father had given me years ago, the kind that says, "I trust you with the things that matter." The conference room felt smaller now, as if the air had thickened with unspoken words. Mr. Harris was shuffling to the next section of the will, giving people just enough time to lean toward each other and murmur. Aunt Margaret tilted her head toward Uncle Robert, her voice barely more than a breath. "I told you, Charles was always sentimental with her." Robert grunted, not looking up from his cufflinks. "Sentiment doesn't pay for upkeep on the estate." Across the table, my cousin Elaine was tapping her phone under the table, her eyes flicking between me and Daniel like she was cataloging expressions for later gossip. Daniel leaned toward her, not bothering to lower his voice enough. "It's just procedure. Dad wanted it done right." Elaine smiled politely, but the edge in her eyes said she understood more than she let on. I kept my gaze on the grain of the mahogany table, tracing the curves in the wood. From the corner of my eye, I caught Daniel watching me, smirk intact, like he was savoring the quiet before his victory speech. The door clicked open and a man I didn't recognize stepped in. Tall, maybe late 50s, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been tailored yesterday. He handed Mr. Harris a small envelope, whispered something, and left without looking at anyone else. The room shifted again. Daniel's drumming fingers paused. Aunt Margaret's hand tightened around her pearl necklace. Mr. Harris slid the envelope to the side without opening it. His face gave away nothing, but the pause was enough for more whispers to bloom. "Probably just another deed," Daniel muttered. Dad had so many properties in his name. I didn't respond. The hum of conversation felt like a storm cloud gathering, thick and electric. Each relative seemed to be aligning themselves, some subtly leaning toward Daniel, others toward me, though no one would admit it out loud. It was the same unspoken game we'd played at every family gathering since I could remember, sides, loyalties, and quiet wagers disguised as polite smiles. When Mr. Harris cleared his throat, the whispers cut off instantly. He placed both hands on the document in front of him, fingers splayed in a way that looked almost grounding. "We now come to the final clause of Mr. Everett's will," he said. Daniel's smirk deepened into something almost theatrical. "Here we go," he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. Mr. Harris's words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. The final clause. Every sound in the room became sharp, exaggerated, the tick of the wall clock, the faint rustle of paper under his hands, the hum of the overhead lights. Daniel leaned forward now, elbows on the table, as if positioning himself to catch every syllable. His smile was still there, but it had shifted. No longer casual amusement, but the anticipation of someone about to receive the prize they'd been promised all their life. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses, scanning the page slowly. The tip of his index finger traced a line of text. Then he stopped. He looked up. Not at Daniel, not at me, at the entire room. "Before I read this," he said, "I want to remind everyone that Mr. Everett reviewed and signed this will personally, in full awareness of its contents." A murmur moved through the relatives like a ripple in water. Aunt Margaret cleared her throat but didn't speak. Elaine tilted her head slightly, her phone now forgotten in her lap. Daniel chuckled under his breath. "Standard disclaimer," he muttered, almost to himself. But Mr. Harris didn't resume right away. He let the silence settle, not empty silence, but the kind that starts to feel heavy, like it's pushing down on you. My hands tightened together in my lap. I could feel my pulse in the tips of my fingers. Mr. Harris's gaze drifted toward the sealed envelope the stranger had brought in earlier. He slid it closer, but didn't open it yet. Daniel's eyes followed the movement, curiosity briefly breaking through his confidence. Then he straightened again, smirk returning, as if whatever was inside could only reinforce what he already believed. The lawyer finally looked down at the page again. The pause stretched long enough that it stopped, being just a pause. I noticed Daniel's drumming had stopped entirely. Mr. Harris drew a breath, and in that single breath, the room became so quiet it felt unnatural, like we were all holding our air in one shared lung, waiting for whatever would come next. Mr. Harris's voice was even when it finally came, but the words carried a weight. That seemed to land differently on each person in the room. The remainder of my estate, including all properties, business holdings, and financial accounts, I leave in their entirety to my daughter, Claire Everett. For a second, no one reacted. It was as if the words had been spoken in a language no one understood. Then, like a single heartbeat after the impact, the room went silent. No cough, no shuffle, no whisper. Just silence, thick and absolute. Daniel didn't move. His smile had frozen in place, the muscles in his jaw tight as stone. His eyes flicked to Mr. Harris, searching for some hint of a mistake. Aunt Margaret's lips parted slightly, as though she were about to speak, but nothing came out. Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair slowly, as if needing more space to process what he'd just heard. Mr. Harris continued without hesitation. It is my express wish that these assets be managed at her sole discretion, and that no portion of them shall be sold or transferred without her consent. He reached for the envelope, opening it carefully, revealing a single handwritten note. This note was left by Mr. Everett to accompany the final clause. I will read it now. Daniel's breathing had changed, not loud, but noticeable too. Me, because I'd grown up hearing the difference between his bored sighs and the sound of him trying to contain frustration. Mr. Harris unfolded the paper. His tone softened almost imperceptibly. Claire, you have always been the one to see what others overlook. This isn't just about inheritance, it's about trust. I believe you'll remember not just what I built, but why I built it. When he set the note down, the silence didn't break. No one seemed ready to move, as if speaking might make the moment more real. Daniel finally blinked, his smirk gone entirely. The silence shattered like glass. Daniel's face twisted disbelief first, then fury. This has to be a joke, he spat, voice low but venomous. You're telling me Dad left everything to you? His hand slammed the table, the sharp crack echoing through the room. Aunt Margaret gasped, clutching her pearl necklace tighter as if it could shield her from the shock. Charles wouldn't do this, not without telling us. Uncle Robert shook his head slowly, eyes darkening. There's got to be a mistake. Harris, are you sure this document is the latest? Mr. Harris remained calm, folding the note carefully. This is the final and legally binding will. Mr. Everett, there are no subsequent amendments. Elaine, my cousin, whispered behind her hand, I never expected this. Claire, what will you do? I felt all eyes turn toward me, a mixture of suspicion, hope, and disbelief. Daniel rose abruptly, pacing now, his voice rising with every word. You weren't even close to Dad in the last years. You weren't here. You don't deserve this. The room was a tempest, whispered accusations, sharp glares, and tense silence, broken only by my own steady breaths. I stood up too, surprising myself with the calm that settled over me. Dad trusted me. That's why. No one answered. Daniel stopped pacing and looked directly at me, eyes burning. We're going to contest this. You'll see. I nodded. If that's what it takes. Daniel's eyes burned with the fire-eyed. Never seen so raw before. This isn't over. We all know Dad wouldn't just cut me out like this. There has to be something wrong with this will. Aunt Margaret chimed in, her voice trembling but resolute. Maybe Dad was pressured. Maybe he wasn't in his right mind. Their words felt like knives, sharp and accusing. But beneath the surface, I sensed desperation, a clinging to the past. To what they thought was right. Mr. Harris sighed, a deep, measured sound. Legally, the will is valid. Mr. Everett was of sound mind and signed this document in the presence of witnesses. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous edge. And what about this note? Who wrote that? Could it be forged? I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me, the silent expectation that I would falter, that I would not be ready for this fight. But I was ready, because I knew my father, because I had seen the doubt in his eyes when he looked at Daniel's blind ambition. The note is in my father's handwriting, I said steadily. And I have no intention of giving up what he trusted me with. The room fractured into heated whispers and sideways glances. I caught Mr. Harris watching me, his calm gaze a rare island in the storm. Daniel's jaw clenched. We'll be consulting our own lawyers, he said. You won't get away with this. I nodded again, feeling the fire rising in me. I'm ready for whatever comes. Days passed, but the tension in the family did not. I found myself retreating often to the quiet of my father's old study, the place where his presence still lingered in the faded scent of cedar and worn leather. I pulled out the journal he had left me, running my fingers over the delicate handwriting. It was more than just words. It was a window into his heart. One entry caught my eye, dated just months before he passed. Daniel has the ambition I once admired, But ambition without empathy will destroy what we built. Claire, you see the world differently. You understand what it means to care, to nurture. This estate isn't just wealth, it's a legacy of values. I trust her to protect that. Reading those lines, everything fell into place. My father's choice wasn't about favoritism or money. It was about trust. About the quiet strength I'd always carried. The one that never showed on boardroom battles, but in the way I had cared for him in his final days. The way I had listened when others turned away. It explained the sealed envelope, the note, the careful words of the will. It explained the pause Mr. Harris took before reading the last clause. This was more than a legal decision. It was a deeply personal one. I understood now why the room had gone silent. Because it wasn't just the distribution of assets that stunned everyone, it was the recognition of something invisible but unbreakable. The room may have been filled with voices, but inside me there was a profound stillness. I had one. Not in the way Daniel imagined, with loud declarations or triumphant shouts, but with something quieter, something heavier. Sitting alone in my father's study, I let the weight of it settle on my shoulders. The house, the business, the accounts, they were mine now. But so was the legacy. I thought of Dad's words: trust, empathy, care, the standards he had set not in contracts, but in moments between us. In the small kindnesses he expected to live on. Yet, beneath the relief, a flicker of doubt stirred. Could I live up to this? Could I protect what he built from not just outside threats, but the family fractures tearing through us? I traced the lines of the journal again, the ink blurring slightly beneath my fingers. The silence in the room felt like a canvas, vast, empty, but full of possibility. Daniel's threats echoed in my mind. Contestations, legal battles, anger, they were real and they were coming. But for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than fear. I was ready because this wasn't just about money. It was about honoring the man who had seen something in me others never did. It was late afternoon when Daniel finally agreed to meet me alone, a neutral cafe halfway between our worlds, where the noise of other lives seemed to drown out the storm brewing between us. He arrived first, already seated, fingers tapping nervously on the tabletop. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by a tight jaw and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. I slid into the seat across from him, folding my hands calmly. I didn't expect you to back down, so icily? He chuckled, but it was hollow. Backing down? You think I'm the type? No, Claire, this is just complicated. His voice lowered, rawer than before. Dad and we had plans. I thought I was the one carrying his legacy forward. I met his gaze steadily. He chose differently. Not because you weren't capable, but because he trusted me in ways you never saw. Daniel's eyes flashed with something like pain. You weren't here when it mattered. You walked away. I took a breath, feeling the old wounds surface. I left because I needed to find myself, but I never stopped caring. And I never stopped coming back. He shook his head slowly. It feels like a betrayal. It feels like a beginning. For a long moment, silence stretched between us. Thick and raw. Then Daniel leaned back, his anger giving way to something quieter. Maybe Dad saw something in you that I couldn't. I nodded. Maybe he did. We didn't resolve everything that day, but something shifted, a fragile acknowledgement of the past, and a tentative step towards something new. Standing in the quiet of my father's estate, I let the late afternoon sun warm my face. The house held memories, laughter, arguments, quiet moments. But now it was mine to shape. I thought about the business, the sprawling properties, the bank accounts. They weren't just assets, they were pieces of a life my father had built with sweat and hope. But more than that, they were a responsibility. I had choices. I could keep everything locked behind walls, protecting it from the world and from the family fractures that had grown too wide to ignore, or I could find a way to honor Dad's legacy in a way that healed rather than divided. I chose the latter. The first step was reaching out, not just to Daniel, but to Aunt Margaret, Uncle, Robert, even Elaine. I invited them to a meeting, not as adversaries, but as family. Some accepted hesitantly, others not at all. But I knew the path wouldn't be easy. As I walked through the halls of the estate, I realized this was more than inheritance. It was about legacy, and I was ready to carry it with all its imperfections and possibilities. Years had passed since that day in the lawyer's office. The estate was no longer just a collection of assets, it had become a home, a symbol of healing. Daniel and I found a fragile peace. We never erased the past, but we learned to work through it, understanding that family is more than shared blood, it's shared effort and forgiveness. Aunt Margaret, once distant and guarded, now smiled genuinely at family gatherings, her pearls replaced by laughter. The business grew under my stewardship, not because I wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because I wanted to honor my father's vision with integrity. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and the sun filtered through the old windows, I would open my mother's journal and read a passage aloud. It was a reminder that legacy is not just about wealth. It's about trust, love, and the courage to carry on when the world expects you to fall. And in those moments, I felt my father's presence not as a ghost of the past, but as a quiet promise for the future.